Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for having me. I love the Believers Summit and how excited and enthusiastic you guys are. I think that it's fair to say that we don't know what to expect over the next few months. And I think now more than ever, Christians have this hunger to get together, to link arms with fellow like-minded believers, and to look around and just kind of be able to say, okay, we're on the same page, right? Like, you got me. If something happens to you, if someone bullies you, if someone cancels you, condemns you, I'm going to be right here standing up with you. I think that we're all ready to come together and arm ourselves with what is good, right, and true in this very chaotic and confusing and cowardly culture. Progressives leverage empathy to get you on their side. They draw you in with a heart-rending story that pushes you to feel the way the victim they've portrayed feels. You then arrive at the conclusion at which they want you to arrive, that the only moral, compassionate, and kind position is the one that agrees with them, that affirms the desires of the subject of their story. And of course, it's not just on the subject of gender that we see this in the media by activists, but on every subject. The left-wing media will tell you the story of the impoverished mother whose baby at the 20-week ultrasound was given a life-limiting diagnosis. On marriage and sexuality, they'll tell you about the two men who just want to be happy together and start a family, but they're facing unfair challenges because of their sexuality. On immigration, they'll show you the poor mother who fears deportation to her home country, which, of course, is riddled with violence and corruption. And on the subject of justice, they'll platform the story of the young black man who was unfairly treated by the police. And in each of these narratives, in each of these stories, they play upon empathy to get you to reach their conclusion that abortion is health care and must be legal, so no woman is forced to give birth to a baby who dies after birth. That love is love, so we must redefine marriage in the family so that two men or two women are guaranteed the right to reproduce children through any means necessary. That no human being is illegal, so we must open the borders so that everyone coming here for a better life can stay as long as they want to. And that social justice is justice, so we must reimagine the police and concept of punitive justice. That we must believe that trans women are women or trans men are men, the idea that men and women are interchangeable, allowing boys and men into girls' spaces and vice versa. Anything other than these positions, progressives want to convince you is unempathetic and therefore unkind and immoral, even evil or hateful or fascist. And I call this toxic empathy. And this is the kind of empathy that manipulates you into believing that the only righteous position is the progressive one. But the truth is, empathy in itself is neither good nor bad. It is taking on the feelings of someone else, putting yourself in their shoes. It can be helpful in understanding a person's position and plight, but it is not necessary. It is not the same as compassion, which literally means to suffer with someone, to take on the suffering of someone else, helping them carry their burden. It is not the same thing as love, which is seeking the best interest of a person. Empathy takes on someone's feelings. Now, that can lead you to compassion or love, or it can lead you to stupidity and even cruelty. Taking on the feelings of others can blind us to truth. It can blind us to the larger reality. It can obscure objective facts and morality. It can replace virtue, which is a higher value that transcends our emotions. empathy has no power to determine right versus wrong and can actually inhibit us from seeing the difference between the two. This is why empathy is actually, despite what progressives tell you, a very poor guide for our lives. It cannot shape our politics because it is a sorry determinant of policy. And Christians actually are not called to empathy. We are called to love. And the love to which we are called is actually independent of how we feel. It is compelled by the love of Christ, which does not wax or wane depending on the situation, the circumstance, or our emotions. Love, unlike empathy, is an action that can only be defined by the God who made love and who is love, as 1 John 4:8 tells us. And in 1 Corinthians 13, the God who is love tells us exactly what love is. Love, among other things, rejoices with the truth. It never rejoices in wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Now, who determines truth? Who arbitrates righteousness versus wrongdoing? Only the God who created truth and authored morality, the God who is their source. The Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the one who made and sustains the universe with his power, who made all of us in his image, who came in the form of a man, Jesus Christ, to be our sacrifice so that we could be made new. That is the God and the only one who can say what love is, what truth is, because he says what is, what's right and what's wrong, what's good and what's bad, what's true and what's not, when life begins, what a woman is, what a marriage is, and what it's not. In the very first chapter of the first book of the Bible, God actually covers these things that today not even a Supreme Court justice can answer. What a woman is, what a marriage is, what the value of life is. He foresaw, he knew, of course, because he exists outside of linear time, that we would be scratching our heads in the year 2024 trying to figure out what a woman is. And he said, you don't even have to read that far in the Bible. I got it in the very first chapter. You only have to read a few verses. When you go down to Genesis 1:27, we get these so-called culture war questions answered. He created them male and female. In his image, he created them male and female. So right there, we see the answer to the question on abortion, because we see the value of life, the value of human beings that is not ascribed to any other creature creation on earth, and that is that we are made in God's image. We see the definition of gender, male and female, and right there we see the definition of marriage between one man and one woman. That's it. First chapter of the first book of the Bible. And really, it goes back even further than that. And I know that you're wondering, how can you go back even further than the first chapter of the first book of the Bible? Well, I can go to the very first verse of the first chapter of the first book of the Bible, arguably the most controversial book, or the most controversial verse, rather, in the Bible, and that is, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, if he created it, that means that he has authority over all of it. That means that nothing escapes him or is outside of him, that he alone gets to say again what is and what isn't, what's true and what's false, what's good and what's bad, what's right and what's wrong. He alone gets to determine that because he is the creator of all of it. And that is why it is not only perfectly acceptable, but necessary for us as Christians to think, speak, and vote as much as we can in alignment with our faith. because we do not serve a compartmentalized God, but an all-encompassing one. God defines what we think about gender, sexuality, marriage, abortion, justice, and yes, even immigration. God says that we are created male and female, and so we are. God says that marriage is between one man and one woman, so it is. God says that life begins at conception, so it does. God says justice must be swift and impartial, so it should be. God created nations and people groups and borders and says that these things are good and necessary for societal order and flourishing, so they are. And by the way, reality and science and studies all reflect these theological truths because God created truth. Christians are manipulated into believing that the only way to avoid the titles of Christian nationalist, I have to say it in that scary voice, fascist, theocrat, or even terrorist, that we must check our beliefs at the door. Before we go to work, before we speak, before we vote. Everyone else, though, gets to bring the full force of their belief system into the public sphere. The secular progressive gets to bring his superstitious assumptions about gender, about what's going on in the womb during pregnancy, about the climate, to the voting booth, into the classroom, into the workplace. But when the Christian does it, it's called tyranny. But in reality, it is Christian doctrine that has been the basis for every free and flourishing society in existence. And it is the abandonment of Christian doctrine that leads to tyranny and decay. And that is why Christianity is always in the crosshairs of tyrants, because we are the boil on their back. From Nero to Newsom, Christians are made to carry the burden of regulations and restrictions that seek to diminish our influence. And progressives really have this multifaceted approach to silence Christians. Maybe they'll take your children away when you don't go along with their gender confusion. Maybe they won't let you foster or adopt because you won't assent to gender ideology. Maybe they'll crush you with lawfare if you refuse to make the floral arrangement or design the website or bake the cake that celebrates their sexual choices. Maybe they'll debank you. Maybe they'll deplatform you. Maybe you'll be a 75-year-old pro-life protester and they'll throw you in jail. Or maybe, and this is their preferred method, they'll just deceive you. And how they deceive Christians in this age is by using toxic empathy to convince you that actually the loving and righteous and true position is the progressive one. That way, they don't have to force you into silence because you will agree with them voluntarily. Because the Christian has been so emotionally manipulated into thinking that empathy is the same thing as love, and with empathy so often becomes affirmation, and with affirmation comes celebration of sin, but the Christian knows that true love defined by God will never affirm sin. And therefore, it is not toxic empathy by which we are guided, but the truth in love. You see, you'll notice a pattern in progressive storytelling, which is very powerful and very influential. They have all the major cultural megaphones. They have academia. They have public education. They have much of big tech, much of big business. They have most of the federal government, most of the intelligence agencies, all of Hollywood. They've got these big cultural megaphones to tell you the stories that they say are liberation from oppression of so-called white supremacy or the cis heteropatriarchy or gender norms or Christianity. And it's a very attractive secular narrative for people who do not want to be under the rules of God, but want to act like they are soldiers of a cause. And this narrative competes with Christianity. And in order to get people onto their team and onto their side, they use this tactic of toxic empathy. But you'll notice that how they do that is by showing you a victim. A victim like Laura, who they say was a victim maybe even of her own body or of our expectations of women, whatever it is. The victim is that woman. When it comes to sexuality and marriage, the victim is the couple who is made up of two men or two women who really want to rent the wombs of women, buy the eggs of another woman in order to create children. The victims, when it comes to the subject of justice, is the allegedly unfairly treated marginalized minority person. The victim when it comes to immigration is always the illegal alien that wants to avoid deportation. But on the other side of this formula, on the other side of this calculation, are the real victims. And we don't get to hear their story from the progressive side. They're all about compassion, all about empathy, and yet they obscure the true victim on the other side of every issue. The real victim when it comes to gender ideology is not the man who suddenly wants to be a woman and go into the girl's bathroom. It is the girl whose right to privacy and fairness has been violated. It is the child whose body, before their frontal lobe was even close to being formed, was mutilated, and they were rendered permanently sterile because of the decisions of doctors and psychologists and even the dereliction of duty of parents. That's the real victim. The victim of abortion is not the woman who is seeking an abortion, although we can have compassion for her and her circumstances, but she is not the victim of abortion. The baby is the victim of abortion. And no matter how much compassion we can and should have for a woman who is truly in a dire situation, who is put in a difficult circumstance, who has been given an unfortunate, even tragic diagnosis, nothing that she is enduring compares to being poisoned and torn apart limb by limb with forceps. The baby is the victim. When it comes to sexuality and marriage, and this is a difficult one, understandably, for even Christians to talk about, because of course we want to reach other people. We don't want to be called hateful. We don't want to be seen of as bigots. And we want to be seen as compassionate. And yet, the victim when it comes to two men or two women coming together trying to redefine marriage and the family and create children is not the two men, it's not the two women, it is the children being forced into motherless or fatherless homes. They are the victims. When it comes to immigration, the primary victim is not the person who broke the law to be here. While again, we can have compassion for their particular circumstances, we can want them to have the gospel, we can want them to get help, but that is not the primary victim in the conversation about illegal immigration. The primary victim is Laken Riley. The primary victim is Kate Steinle. The primary victims are the young women and young men who would still be here today if we secured our border. The victims in the conversation about illegal immigration are not the illegal aliens, but the people who were killed by the preventable crimes committed by the illegal aliens. When it comes to justice, the primary victim is not the person who gets policed or who gets put in jail or who is punished by the law for committing a crime. The primary victim is the young child who is killed because of a prosecutor's or a judge's refusal to do their job and to put a criminal in jail. The primary victims of social justice policy are the people who are stolen from, assaulted, and killed by people who should be in prison and would be if it weren't for progressive activists. So this is how we have to shift our thinking. With every heart-rending, toxic empathy story that we see from the left, and man, there are going to be so many in the coming months. So many. And you will have friends, you will have family members, people that you thought understood, people that you thought knew the truth, people that you thought were conservative Christians, sending you a story about abortion, sending you a story about illegal immigration, and they're going to ask you, but what about this? Maybe I shouldn't vote for Trump, or maybe I should vote Democrat, or maybe if we even took the voting out of it and they just thought maybe progressives are right about this. What you have to do first is zoom out and ask yourself, but what is the truth about this situation? And who is the victim on the other side of this story? What is the truth about this situation? Who is the victim on the other side of this story? And what does not empathy lead me to, but the truth in love as God defines them lead me to? That is our task as Christians. It is not foregoing compassion. It is not abandoning love. It is seeing the entire situation and being led by the truth of God's word into the truly loving position, not the flimsy, simply empathetic one. Because the position of toxic empathy is actually harmful. It harms both woman and baby. It harms the person who is gender deceived and the person who is a victim of them invading their space. It harms both the immigrant, both the person trying to get here and the citizens. It harms both the people committing the crimes and the people who are victims of the crimes. It harms the people who are engaging in pretend marriage and the children of those unions. Toxic empathy harms. The truth in love is better. So that is our challenge. That is our task as Christians. I am passionate about this subject, so I wrote a book titled Toxic Empathy: How Progressives Exploit Christian Compassion. And it will be out October 15th. It's not out right now. Hopefully you will be able to pre-order it, purchase it then. But I hope that you will feel equipped. Oh, look right there. You can do that if you want to. I hope that you will feel equipped by all of the information that is given to you and all of the arguments, biblical, factual, scientific arguments on all the subjects that we discussed today. We have to be agents of love, agents of truth, agents of order in these very chaotic and confusing and toxic times. Thank you so much.